Okay, let's talk about fever. This is one I think too many people pull the trigger on too quickly. They try to treat a fever as soon as the fever's there, but the best advice I can give you on fever is let it ride, let it go. What is a fever? What's the intention or the purpose of a fever? It's to increase the temperature, because when the body temperature is increased, we kill off bacteria, makes it harder for them to thrive and survive, and viral particulate. So we want to kill these guys. And our body's natural response is to have a fever. Now, what happens a lot of times, and I see this all the time in younger moms that don't have just the experience. So if you're a younger mom watching this, no offense to you, it's just an experience thing. But if the fever's 101, even up to 103, let it go. Where your child is not going to die over a fever unless the fever becomes so severe that they end up in the hospital because of a seizure, because it gets so high, like what we call febrile seizures. 101 to 103 isn't going to accomplish that. So let the body ride that fever for a little while, because what you're actually doing is you're shortening your sick time by letting that fever burn out the bacteria, the viruses that are creating or contributing to the problem. So if you jump on, the fever right at 99, which I've seen a lot of inexperienced parents do, you're just not letting the body get that opportunity. Now, whereas a parent, you might make a decision and say, Dr. Osborne, this is my kid. I'm here. You're not here. What do you know? If the child, I'm talking about treating a child, if the child is just completely wiped out, I should probably spell that correctly. And miserable. Sometimes you make that decision to try to break a fever because you're just trying to you're just trying to be empathetic to the child. Now, if it's you, sometimes just you can't handle it any longer. So what I'm trying to say is, try to let the fever ride, but if you need to break it because you're just absolutely miserable, don't feel bad about doing that either. But let it ride as long as you can. One of my favorite ways to break fevers is right here. I don't like the ibuprofen. So ibuprofen reduces vitamin C. And when we're trying to fight a cold or a flu, we don't want this. It also reduces iron, which is also antibacterial. So we don't want to take a medicine to lower our fever that actually blocks nutrients that protect us and help our immune systems function. A lot of ibuprofen, too, is contaminated with filler ingredients that aren't good for us. And if you're gluten sensitive, a lot of these brands have gluten-based fillers and corn and other derivatives in them. So it's just not, I'd be very, very cautious around any kind of ibuprofen. And if you can find some that doesn't have any of those fillers, it's still gonna create that vitamin C and iron effect. On top of that, ibuprofen rips microscopic holes in the mucus lining of your GI tract, and that poses a tremendous immune problem when you're trying to fight something that's already gotten into your body. So you don't want to open up whatever's in you. You don't want to create leakage across your gut so that microorganism can get across and go systemic into you and just make things worse. So ibuprofen, it does work well to bring a fever down, but it has this impact, and that's why I don't recommend it. I like white willow because it's also an NSAID, so the mechanism of action for both of these is that they're non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, but the difference being this does this type of damage. This is super safe, even for kids, unless your child is allergic to aspirin. Remember that aspirin is derived from the white willow bark, and so aspirin is actually a derivative of white willow. Although a synthetic derivative. I don't like aspirin because it does do mucosal damage to the GI tract and it affects vitamin C and iron, unlike white willow. So I like white willow as an alternative. It works very, very well if you absolutely need to take something. Now, you can also break fevers with cold compresses. As we mentioned earlier, if you had headaches, aches, and pains, cold compresses work well for that, but also work well to bring temperature down, especially if you put that cold compress on the forehead or on the back of the neck. A cool shower or bath can also help to break a fever. Epsom salt as well in that bath when you're using it. So these are just, again, natural things that you can do to break that fever. My favorite being, if you need something medicinal, the white willow. Now, some people like to take the Tylenol, as I mentioned a moment ago. Tylenol can damage the liver. Tylenol also commonly contains a number of fillers. And so I'm using Tylenol as a brand name, but it's acetaminophen. So if you're talking about the over-the-counter, if you're buying an off-brand, a non-Tylenol brand, it's acetaminophen, the drug itself. And many of these products, even the generic versions, contain fillers that aren't good for you, but all of them affect the liver. So white willow would be my preference. Now, aches and pains. What accompanies fever and what accompanies illness? What happens? Why do we get aches and pains? Well, one of the things that happens when our fever goes up, we get a fever, we get body aches and pains. Part of what's happening is our body is breaking down muscle tissue to get to protein. Why? Why does our body want that protein? So muscle tissue is a reserve tank, a storage unit, if you will, for extra protein. And so if you're sick and your body is trying to fight it, it's using protein to fight it. Protein is one of the most powerful weapons against illness. That's why people who are protein malnourished get sick more frequently and have more complications. Protein is the precursor to antibodies. It's how we make antibodies. So if you want a good reservoir of protein so that you can have antibodies for those times where, because we all get sick, none of us are fully immune, we can all get sick, but the more muscle mass, lean mass you have, the more protein backup plan you're going to have to make these antibodies. Okay, but when you're breaking down protein to get access to those antibodies, you're going to create some muscle aches and muscle pains. This is why some people lose weight when they're sick for prolonged periods of time, a week plus, and they're laying in bed and just sweating and hot flashes and aches and pains. So how do we deal with those aches and pains? Quercetin plus vitamin C. Mix these two together. This is one of the most powerful combinations naturally to help with regulating that inflammatory cascade. So when you take quercetin and vitamin C together, their mechanism of action is very similar. It works on the same mechanism that prednisone works on. So it's a very, very potent combination for inflammation. So in quercetin, I like to give between 2 and 4 grams a day. The more you give, the more potentially effective. And with vitamin C, I like to give this minimum 5 grams a day for an adult. But as high as bowel tolerance, go all the way up to bowel tolerance. What I have found over the years is that most people, when they're sick, very easily tolerate 5 grams, but actually need more. So it's even better when they go up to 10, 15, 20 grams a day because your body's trying to fight. Remember, vitamin C is a very, very important nutrient that helps your immune cells do their work. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to overcome. So when you combine vitamin C and quercetin together for the aches and the pains, you also get benefit in fighting as well. And vitamin C has been very well established with flus and colds. The literature's ripe with that, especially post-COVID world. We've done so much more research on using vitamin C both orally and intravenously and outcomes. And it's vitamin C, there's no doubt about it, it's very effective, very helpful. White willow, again, for the aches and pains, as I mentioned earlier, you can use it to bring fever down, but it's also a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, so it works in reducing pain by blocking something called cyclooxygenase, which is a mechanism of how pain is created. So white willow can be very, very effective, especially if you've got a headache, a throbbing head, and you just can't sleep, because one of the fundamentals to recovering is good night's sleep, and if you're aching, it's harder to fall asleep. So if that's you, don't hesitate to use something like white willow to get you that relief. And then for aches and pains as well, one of the most effective ways, if you don't want to take anything, is just climb in a warm bath, and don't be shy with the Epsom salt. That will relax your muscles and soothe your muscles, and that heat will increase blood flow, and it will help reduce the potential for those aches and pains kicking in. Now, if you're running a fever, hot bath might not sound like a good idea, but oftentimes with fevers, you go through fever and then you break your fever and then you get super cold and you get the chills. So this is where that Epsom salt bath, that hot Epsom salt bath can come in and be helpful. One of my other favorite ways for aches and pains to help with aches and pains is something called proteolytic enzymes. I mentioned bromelain earlier, which is an example of a proteolytic enzyme, but there are many different types. There's serrapeptidase and nattokinase and others. But these enzymes, basically, when you're sick, your blood, your white cells in your blood, your immune system is fighting. And the byproduct of that is basically inflammation in your bloodstream that leads to basically thickening, because protein elements in your blood creating inflammation are driving a thickness in your blood, a viscosity of your blood goes up, and so that delivery of blood to your tissue, to your muscles, it's more challenging. It's harder to get good blood flow into those tissues, and so that can also lead to aches and pains. What these guys do is they help support that good blood viscosity so your blood can continue to be delivered, but they also have anti-inflammatory effects. And so when we're hurting, we want that anti-inflammatory effect. So quercetin, vitamin C, white willow, proteolytic enzymes all have very powerful anti-inflammatory effects. Epsom more has a kind of a relaxing, calming effect, but it also can, that hot water can help increase blood supply and blood flow and get you some relief. Now, if you've got gut symptoms, there's a whole other plethora. So there's a whole bunch of enteroviruses that I've been seeing, and people have been calling in, about. Really, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen an uptick in these. So if you're on the toilet, if you've got that chronic diarrhea, if your stomach hurts, if you've got tremendous amounts of nausea, these are some things that can be super helpful for your gut itself. One of my favorite for the gut is the combo zinc and glutamine. Now, glutamine is the primary fuel source for your gut, for gut cells, predominantly your enterocytes, which are your small intestinal cells, and your immune cells. So gut and immune cells both use glutamine as their primary fuel source. But glutamine is also important to seal the gut lining. And with many enteroviruses, leaky gut is a very common consequence. So this can be helpful in that regard at kind of reestablishing a gut barrier. Zinc helps glutamine do that job, by the way. Now, zinc also blocks viral replication in multiple different ways. There are a number of different mechanisms by which zinc can block viral replication and viral spread. So, getting that zinc in on the gut, if you've got an enterovirus, can be effective at helping stop it. But zinc can also soothe the gut because it's necessary to help heal the gut. So if your gut's being damaged by a virus, that zinc is a building block to help that gut heal. NAC, we've mentioned a number of times already, but NAC can be very effective in this combination. One of my favorite, though, is if your stomach just hurts, is to use these things: slippery elm, mucin, chamomile, cat's claw, MSM, which is an anti-inflammatory but also soothes the gut lining. So these things are all what we call kind of mucilaginous products. They put a coating down over the stomach and GI tract. So if you're super nauseous, that coating can sometimes make the difference and really be beneficial and helpful for you. So especially if you're trying to get something on your stomach, but you're just so nauseous it's hard to eat. These things can be very, very effective. Now, quercetin, we mentioned earlier as well. Quercetin helps with gut symptoms because it has antiviral properties. Quercetin actually helps push zinc into your cells. It actually is called what's known as an ionophore. It helps zinc get into the cell, and when you're trying to fight a gut virus, that sometimes can be an invaluable tool. Now, as far as the diarrhea is concerned, one of the best things you can do is just a high-quality probiotic. And with this, my recommendation is 200 billion plus when you're super sick. 200 billion, and when I say 200 billion, I'm talking about colony-forming units. is what that stands for. That's the dosing for probiotics when you're buying them. So if you're buying one, look for something 200 billion plus colony-forming units. Lactobacillus and Bifidobacter species, both good options, and most products contain a nice mix of the two. You can also go with foods, fermented vegetables that are rich, like sauerkraut or cabbage, or sauerkraut's fermented cabbage, or fermented carrots or cauliflower. Also good options there to get probiotics through your food. But these things, if you've got gut symptoms, can be very helpful at overcoming.